Okay. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly. It is Friday, April 29, 2022. We are noticed from 2:10 to 3:10 p.m. This is a work session regarding AIM 56-2022 Heritage Land Bank Wetlands Mitigation Program. So we'll start by going around the room.
Pete Peterson.
Felix Rivera. Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Adam Trombley.
And
Mandy Honest, Clerk's Office. Jenna Brister, Clerk's Office.
do we have anyone on the phone? No one on the phone, and we've just been joined by Ms. Zelatel. And there are a couple other members who will be joining in a few minutes as well. Mr. Trombley, do you want to start with an overview, or do you just want to go straight to questions?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. I'm not entirely sure what the work session's for, so.
Sure. Thank you. And the individual who actually requested the work session, I believe, is on his way. Is there any other members who want to start with any questions? Mr. Rivera?
So perhaps I'm making an incorrect assumption, but I assume that the reason that Mr. Constant pulled this item and postponed it and wanted a work session was to dig into the implications of page 3 of 3, lines 24 through 37. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'm assuming.
I think you're correct. And in particular, the note about the ASD transportation facility.
Correct.
Yep. And so, Mr. Trombley, would you be able to comment on, in particular, the note, this change in site use planning will require a new location be found for the ASD transportation facility since the Tudor Elmore development TED zoning special limitations require the current facilities relocation prior to development of TED, and the navigation center is proposed to occupy a portion of the space previously approved for the ASD facility.
Yeah, the only thing I can comment on is that is true, and I also believe that it was determined, as I talked to staff and I talked to planning, that it was determined that even moving the bus barn there was going to be too expensive to put it there. So whether the navigation center was going in there or not, there was going to have to be another location found, from my understanding of what staff told me.
That there would need to be another location?
Yeah, it was too expensive to move the bus barn there.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And do we have someone online who just joined?
Yes, Randy, I just dialed back in. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we've been joined by Mr. Solt. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, so is it the admin's position then? I mean, we went through a pretty extensive site selection process, a formalized one, to find a place to put the student transportation facility, the bus barn. And this was selected. And I don't recall there being really any other acceptable location, given sort of the need to be set away from residential areas, the relative size, and what was one of there was another major requirement I'm trying to remember. Oh, it had to be located in a certain place for the school district's needs because of the different schools it was serving. So if we can't move this facility, is it sort of the administration's position that the Tudor Elmore development project is dead?
No, not at all. In fact, the mayor has met with some members of Zelatel and Rivera and expressed a tremendous amount of support for that project.
But how would you, I mean, I just remember, I think, I can remember if you or somebody else mentioned keeping it on sort of the general site or the footprint of where the municipality is now. But I remember during the discussion when we were talking about the TED a few years ago, that basically I'm trying to remember who was leading the charge on the other side, basically said that there isn't enough space, that I think it was the school district that said, like, we like literally can't turn our buses. Like we if you try to put us in this smaller footprint, we can't fit the buses. And so can you explain to me, is that not the case? Are they thinking that the transportation facility would be on that same footprint, or is there somewhere else you've identified where it could realistically go?
I have not, we have not identified another location. The only rendering that I saw, and again, it was preliminary by, I believe, Irwin was initially involved in this. I think the rendering that I saw showed the bus barn actually behind the new health department, if I'm correct on what that rendering would look like. Now, again, that was a proposal. It wasn't set in stone. Nothing had been determined. I don't know if that was prior to the work that this body did to do the rezone and place those special limitations on it. So I don't know how that rendering came in in correlation with that rezone with special limitations. So all I can say is that the administration is highly supportive of the TED development, wants it. It's good for the community. It's good for Midtown. It's good for that location. As far as another site selection for the bus barn, that has not been reviewed or looked at, or I have not even had any discussions with the school district regarding that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Any other questions? Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, I think we may have to think outside the box as far as the bus barn is concerned. The complaints that we've been hearing from neighbors from the beginning are about the emissions, depending on which direction the wind's blowing, on whether there's an inversion or not that particular morning. And it might be less expensive to try to figure out a way to collect the exhaust from the buses than trying to find a location and rebuild it. And then it ends up affecting another neighborhood somewhere. And maybe start looking at electric buses. I don't know. We might have to look at other alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Okay, I don't see anyone else in the queue. Mr. Trombley, would you talk a little bit about the permit modification for the Navigation Center project? I know we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about it, and my understanding is that the administration will be submitting the permit modification request
Yes.
form soon, and that it will take several months, or could you talk about that process and how
Sure.
it could impact construction?
Sure. So in the past, I believe it was sometime within the past 3 weeks, we've contracted out with Dow to help us with the conditional use permit, as well as the conditional use process, as well as the the wetlands permit modification. And so we had just a preliminary kind of fact-finding conversation with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we asked what the process is, and we asked about timelines. And the timeline they said is anywhere from 2 to 4 months is what they told us for that permit modification. One of the things that we have going for us is the fact that the permit has already been approved and been modified multiple times. And as far as the construction status for the Navigation Center, obviously a lot of things do hinge on that wetlands permit.
Thank you, Mr. Trombley. Any other questions, or Mr. Dunbar?
So I'm wondering, I remember the plan for the student transportation facility at that other, the area where we proposed to meet it,
Is that behind Totem?
to move it. No, not there. To the place that where
sorry.
it was going to go until just now. That the plans were pretty elaborate. It's going to be a pretty nice facility, and I wonder if that could be shrunk, or maybe we could have some cost controls to make it a little bit more effective. Like, just envision a way where we could do that. That does prove to be the most cost-effective area where we're going to put it, right? Because it can't fit on the other site, and there really isn't another appropriate location, so it has to go to that location. And we can find the money for it. To what degree does this wetland permit modification sort of make that entire tract unavailable? So I don't know the rules around these wetland permits. Does it make the whole tract unavailable? Does it mean we can go back and ask for a different kind of modification? Does it really take that whole parcel off the table forever? And if it takes it off the table for the for the student transportation facility, does it also take it off the table for any other kind of development the municipality might want to engage in the future?
So the permit, when you ask for a permit modification, it has to do with the use that you're using it for, right? The site itself, I don't. That's a really good option. I don't know if we really thought about that as far as maybe splitting that up and saying, never mind, we only want to modify the permit this location for a proposed navigation center and leave the remaining for a bus barn. That's a really good point, Mr. Dunbar. Let me do some more research on that because I didn't think about that. The site itself, when you look at that lot, and I don't know if this is the entire lot, because when you look at this lot, there's Class C and Class A wetlands, and it's about 1.1 million square feet. And so is this proposed expansion? Okay. Well, the lot, which includes the APD building, and I believe the animal control, as well as.
It's off. The yellow is what was intended to be permitted by Dow initially.
Right. So and I'll get back with you, Mr. Dunbar, because I think that's a really good point. And I don't think anybody thought of that maybe we can only modify one section as opposed to the entire thing.
So I'm looking at this, if I'm understanding right, the yellow, that's the shelter area. That's where we're going to construct the adult shelter. Is that right?
No, I don't believe so. If I could go up here real quick. If is this the existing fuel station?
Is that the evidence?
Where's the APD? Where's APD at?
Do you see?
Oh, right
Entrance
here?
road?
APD's over here?
Yes, sir.
So
It's zoomed in.
where's the existing evidence lot? The vehicle evidence lot is where?
I think it's that large, long rectangle there, right? Isn't
This
that?
right here?
Yeah, I think that's the evidence lot, right?
It's a portion of that.
Yeah.
So we're
It's a
getting rid of
small
this
portion of that.
So was this considered part of the evidence lot?
No, that's the parking lot and the treed area to the south of the parking lot.
So
That's-
this is the current evidence lot.
A small portion of that is the evidence lot. Some of it is the wetlands to the west of it that is currently treed. So the ASD Transportation Center was going to take up almost the entire property.
So we were going to have to move. It's something I didn't.
No,
pick
you
up
weren't
on.
going to move. Yeah,
We were going to
were
move the evidence lot
Mhm.
if we had built the transportation facility there.
Yeah, and
yes.
Part of
our
the
last
reasons.
estimates was about anywhere from $2 to $5 million to move the evidence
Right.
lot. Because you got to find another location. The other thing that I think would be advantageous, because when did the MLMP sale go through?
Yeah.
2 years ago. So that was after all this. I believe the city acquired some old MLMP properties. Am I correct?
Well, no, we did, but they were like down off Ship Creek, right?
all
Oh,
of
they
them
went to
did.
Chugach? Okay. But again, one of the big challenges with the student transportation facility is that it has to be in sort of this general
Right.
area. It has to be like, because it serves, I think, East, Bartlett, and actually part of West for some reason, but it had to be like on this side of town. Yeah, I mean, it's a giant lot, right? Or it's a lot of land. And it seems like, unless I'm misinterpreting what we have here, the actual incursion from the the shelter into the wetlands is relatively small, right? Isn't it just like a small portion? Because most of it's on the existing parking lot.
Yeah, well, that's the structure itself. But when you look
Ah.
at access with fire
Okay.
in the surrounding area, and the idea was that since you're going through the modification, to just modify the whole area. But that's a really good point. Maybe we shouldn't modify the whole area, just 100%, just exactly what we need, and then look at the remaining, keeping it the same. Maybe even being able to put a bus run there. And again, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not 100% familiar with all of the HLB land, but perhaps Shelley could expound on this. Is that There is a parcel of HLB land, I believe, up Tudor, which would be east on Tudor on the south side of Tudor. Am I correct? But I don't know what wetlands that is.
Yeah, Shelley Roughton, Assembly Council's office, former Heritage Land Bank Management Officer. I think you're talking about study site 27 for
Mhm.
the ASD transportation site selection study. That would be HLB parcel 3-042. It is just north of the AWU water towers, just south of Tudor Elmore or Tudor at Patterson Road. It is probably HLB's best soil. It does have a little bit of wetlands on the side.
I'll just say right off the bat,
Yeah.
before we go down any further,
It's-
the
it's-
opposition from
Yes.
Stuckingham Heights was vociferous.
Exactly.
They
Yes.
were incensed at the idea of putting it there because the access would have been on and off Campbell Airstrip Road, at least some of it. And they were just up in arms. Like I have literally the most up in arms I've ever seen that community council.
So there, when traffic did that analysis, they didn't say you could dump right out on Tudor.
Some of it, Shelley, do you remember? I think there was some access on Tudor, but they had to have 2 access points for whatever reason. And
Yep.
so you had some of it, you could only be eastbound. It would turn on, but then to get
Yep.
back out, you have to turn on to Campbell Airstrip.
So you could hit the light.
Yeah. And, if you think about it, I don't totally blame Stuckingham Heights for that either. I think that they're right. Like if you were to try to turn off of that on, during rush hour,
Yeah.
coming out of Stuckingham and have 40 buses in front of you,
Right.
people would lose their minds. And there were some other real challenges. I think it was really expensive also. I mean, I guess they're all really expensive to develop, but there were some other issues there too.
Right. To go from that site, you would have to go across Benny Benson and
Yeah.
the botanical gardens and come out right there. I think there's a little bit of terrain there. There's also some utilities. Just to talk about the navigation center site, we have it up here and unfortunately we can't turn it landscape, but you can see the navigation center footprint that we've been shown. To the south of that is wetlands. And when I was instructed to contract with Dow for that, we were going to permit for the wetlands to the south, just to the new road to the evidence lot. So when we say the whole thing, Mr. Twombly doesn't mean the entire parcel
Mhm.
covering up the the ASD Transportation Center in the whole. Just that yellow highlighted part is what would be covered up. And it's difficult to tell that that's what it is because of the 2 different scales of the drawings. But that is the portion that is in the yellow highlight on the other piece of paper, or on the other drawing.
Madam Chair.
And
The other-
I think that area may have been reduced by Dowell at this point.
Yeah. The other thing I'd like to mention is, as we looked at different locations for the navigation center, and we identified this parcel, we discussed with APD, the chief, about parking, and he said that we couldn't. It was very difficult to encroach in any of his parking because while the building still has its use, they're not doing a change of use, and because you're not doing a change of use, you still need the allotted parking. So with the bus barn going there, I'm not sure what would happen with APD's parking unless they changed the use and required it, because I think that would actually be in violation of probably Title 21 if you took away some of that parking. Even though APD isn't using it the same way they had been before, the chief still said that they needed all the parking. So that's the other thing to think about with keeping the bus barn at that location. And you know what? I haven't read the study, so maybe that was addressed. But it did come up during the navigation center discussion.
Any other comments or questions?
I guess one, and I think this was addressed last night, but I want to reiterate, Mr. Peterson had highlighted some verbiage that was explained to us. This is old verbiage about, possibility of expansion of the shelter facility or the footprint. And that was why we had to, I thought that was what was driving some of the permitting for the wetland area or the area to the south. Is that the case? And were we permitting more than we might be needed to because there was a thinking that we might need more parking or more modular buildings or another facility in the near future?
Sure. If I remember correctly, it was the permit applied to a location. And when you're modifying it, we were going to modify it for the whole area. I think that was just the discussion. I don't think there's any intent for expansion, but like I said, Mr. Dunbar, I think your idea of maybe modifying it partially, but then if the navigation center does go there, if that is approved by this body, then the other question comes is that, can you put a bus barn right next to the shelter, and what does that do?
Any
Are you
other?
interested in putting the bus barn back near the totem? I'm just kidding. Because that went well.
Are there other parking lots downtown that we could use that are not being, used regularly enough that we could build the new health department building there? I mean, it just seems like we're running out of options, so we may have to, look in other directions or something.
You're looking for other existing parking lots for the health department.
Yeah, to a place maybe downtown because once the new building is built, the old one's going to be demolished, and they're hoping to build senior housing there.
What's that?
It was going to be retrofitted.
Right. It's not a bad idea though, Pete. Like instead of, if you could leave the student transportation facility where it is and then give that, the TED project could have more land where the health department was. If we could find another lot for the health department, right? Because the idea was we were basically paying for a health department by giving them this land. And if we could find other land to also give them, maybe we wouldn't have to expand it so much. We got another tract, Susan, since we went through the whole TED thing, we got another tract right next door because of the dog mushers. We like swapped with the dog mushers, right?
Yeah, we do own that now. That's in that's in real estate.
The intent of moving the health department to TED, I think, was to get it in the UMed district. And so perhaps downtown, may not be the best option there. I think, Meg, am I right? Is that what that look was?
So the intent was to get it in the UMed district. So it's part of the kind of medical core of town and not related to the health department, but I think it's worth remembering that we get perennial complaints about the exhaust and the fumes of the bus barn from UACC.
May I respond, Madam Chair? I agree. And now I'm the proud recipient of much more of the UACC in my district. But I will say that, try not to let perfect be the enemy of the good. For me, for the area, I always saw the primary benefit not being the health department building, but the grocery store and the condos, the housing and the grocery store. And if we could get the housing and the grocery store in there, to me, that's like the primary benefit. And if we have to find a different place to put the health department. I also remember there being some consternation from the downtown representative because we have resolutions and ordinances on the books that say you're supposed to concentrate municipal buildings in the downtown core. And we were violating that by moving it to UMed. But.
Felix or Mr. Rivera and then Mr. Peterson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the thought there, but I am very suspect of the idea of maintaining the bus barn where it is and putting a bunch of people right next to it. I don't know how that makes any type of environmental sense whatsoever. So I think this needs to be a package. We need to continue seeing it as a package. Otherwise, I just don't see how it happens.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Peterson? Mr.
Well,
Peterson?
You know, I just happen to think that there's a building in Midtown that used to be occupied by an oil company that I've heard is mostly vacant at this point in time. So, hey, for what it's going to cost to move the bus barn, we might be able to afford it.
Chair LaFrance. Yes, Mr. Dunbar, just to clarify, the Tozier tract cost HLB about $3.4 million. So to lump it with TED would be a mistake because Tudor Elmore is real estate services property, whereas Tozier is HLB property. And the intent was to plat and rezone and flip Tozier, so.
But then we're putting housing next to the bus barn, as Mr. Rivera
Right.
described.
Exactly, yeah.
So Mr. Trombley and then
There's a
Ms.
little
Allard,
bit of a,
oh, okay.
that's all.
Yeah, I know that this is probably going to be fairly controversial, but it is something to think about. And being that we all understand that projects take a long time, and I know that the university area is probably opposed to this, but opening up the northern access will open up land where health department could go, possibly a bus barn could go. I don't know who owns the land in there. But again, I mean, if we're running out of usable space and we're looking for options, I'm just wanted to throw that out there as everything's looked at, since we're looking at everything.
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate the idea of perhaps putting the health department in that UMed area and that the extension might facilitate that. I still don't support the extension. The bus barn, I think, would be a non-starter, just thinking about how much land you'd need and the kind of land that's there. And frankly, the Wesleyan neighborhood, that area, having the bus barn close to them, I think would be extremely challenging. I'll say, though, I guess where I do disagree with Mr. Rivera is I know the UACC Community Council is very passionate about keeping the bus barn separate from residential uses. There are many cities around the country where those things directly abut each other. I mean, you go to like New York City or somewhere like that, and there is an apartment building next to a bus barn. And it might not be ideal environmentally, but I will say, I think part of the hurt and injury that's felt by the UACC is they were there living, and then we put the bus barn, we dropped it on top of them. If we were to build condos or other housing next to the bus barn, people would be moving there with the understanding you are moving next to a bus barn, and it might be a little bit, you might get a little bit of a discount on your house, and you're going to hear some honks and get some exhaust early in the morning, but you're making that choice. And so it's sort of like moving to the existing nuisance, So I don't think those are quite so incompatible as UACC makes them out to be, especially if one is pre-existing and people are moving to next to it.
Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that, Mr. Dunbar. I think the difference between sort of the compatibility in a state like New York and here, our environmental factors are very different. And so actually the complaints that we get the most often regarding the bus barn is during the winter. And when inversions happen, I mean, it's quite literally folks are choking in their homes. It gets that bad. So I don't know, again, why would we want to force that upon a whole new group of potential residents in that area?
Ms. Zalatel?
So just as we're kind of thinking about MOA assets and wetlands, what's the status of the old Federal Archives site? Because that's also got some wetlands mitigation issues, and I believe there's a loan on it. I believe. I don't quite know. So if you got an update, that'd be helpful.
Yep, that land is valued around, our latest appraisal was done around 3.7 million. That it was purchased for 6. with the idea that it would be rezoned. We do have a proposal right now to do a land swap. It was an interfund loan, so it's not like your mortgage where it's tied. But we have a very responsible developer who's interested in doing a potential land swap with property that he owns, where he would build multifamily housing on that archive site. It really, really, really good idea, to be honest with you, for housing.
Interesting. Thanks for that update.
Mhm.
I'll be interested to see if that developer thinks he or she can make that pencil, because I believe Cook Inlet looked at it previously and a couple of others, and it just never penciled as a project. So,
Well, I will say that there's some really exciting proposals coming forward, and you guys are going to see this. There's going to be some stuff introduced ordinance wise. One of them is that if you build 12 or more units, you're looking at a don't quote me, I could be wrong. I think upwards of a 25-year tax abatement citywide. That's being worked on right now with that downtown working group, but we're looking at expanding that. So I think having some tax abatements for that location would probably help things pencil.
Madam Chair, if I may. So that sounds great. I'm glad there's some things
Mhm.
in the works and to maybe put some lots in use. My request would be that as those projects, even if they're somewhat preliminary, if you can at least brief the members in the districts so they can be reaching out to their community councils. There's nothing worse than a project being introduced that we haven't had a chance to talk with community council about.
Absolutely.
It just becomes problematic. So especially if something had been attempted in the area before and didn't pan out, we have to be ready to address and have that conversation about why this would be different.
Absolutely. And the old archive site, in order for it to do what the developer would like to do, I think it has to be rezoned to R4A, which is mixed use residential. And so that I believe R4A is that. But R4A is really valuable zoning. And so obviously that's always a public process as well. And people are going to want to know why that's the case. But I'd be more than happy to give you guys a heads up when that does go through, or before it goes through. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Trombley, and we've been joined by Ms. Quinn Davidson. Do members have any other questions or comments? Thank you again, Mr. Trombley, for joining us. Appreciate it. With
Absolutely.
that, we are adjourned.
And then you've got one last one at 3:20, the youth member.
Oh, let's,